to master the behavioral interviews. We will try to learn that what behavioral interviews are, how they reflect, why they are needed and whatnot. So let me first tell you that what is in it for you. What are all the things we are going to discuss? Number one, we are going to talk about the introduction and the importance of behavioral interviews. We will learn what behavioral interviews are, how they represent, what type of questions are being asked, how it is different, everything related to them. On top of it, we will learn that why they are important, why do you care about it. Next, we will learn the STAR method. So STAR method is nothing but a way to articulate the answers and how you present the answers in the behavioral interviews, because that is a huge portion of what you are actually going to do. Third thing is that how you need to prepare, research and present yourself. How can you be ready? What are the things you need to understand? What are the things you are going to do? And make sure that you are basically doing best what you can. And preparation is 90% of the work. The actual interview is only 10%. You just want to make sure that you execute properly. After it, we will learn about the categories of behavioral interviews, because behavioral interviews, they have several different categories amongst which the questions can be asked. We will try to brush up on these categories, but they are pretty generic. So it's not like rocket science that you need to mug something up or anything. And then we are going to go into the meat of the actual scenario. That is 50 different questions and their answers. So 50 different behavioral questions. And these questions, in my opinion, cover almost all the topics that you can think of. So basically we are going to talk about questions from all the different categories, why they are being asked, what is the intent behind that. Some questions might be tricky, so how to deal with that, what should be your approach, what is your thinking, how can you develop the temperament so that you can perform better for these questions. And lastly, in the last segment, if my throat allows, then we will go for the that how can you deal with easy and difficult questions, because many questions would be really tricky. What should be your idea for that? How can you handle the non-verbal communication? Because many times, depending on what type of environment setting you are in, what type of interview that is, it could be virtual interview, it could be in-person interview, it could be a panel interview where you are interviewing with 4 different people at the same time. So what should be your approach, and how can you be in the best suited position to formally and in a positive manner complete your interview? And lastly, some resources and some follow-ups. So first, let me give you a quick introduction about myself. My name is Parth Vyas, as every one of you know. I have been in the IT industry for 10 plus years, which means I have some idea about what I'm talking about, and I have been on the both sides of the block. I have given a lot of interviews and I have taken some interviews. I have given probably over like 100 plus interviews throughout my career on various different stages and different companies and whatnot. So I know that what type of questions can be asked. Many times I really needed the job and I failed because I was under the pressure and I didn't know how to learn with it. So I have done a lot of trial and error in order to get to where I am today, but I want to share my knowledge that I have received so far, so it can be helpful in your journey. Like, you don't have to spend so much time of what I had to go through. Basically, I also run my own YouTube channel. You already know that since you are here. My hobbies: I like watching movies. I really love playing Call of Duty. I enjoy hiking quite a lot. So yeah, these are the things I love to do. Few fun facts about myself. In terms of my education, I have masters in computer science. I pursued my bachelor's from India and then I did my masters in Canada. Most of you might know I recently became dad of twin beautiful daughters, so they are the apple of my eye. And I was born and raised in India, Indian guy. And since last 10 years, I have been living in Canada. So I have great admiration for both the countries. Now, without any delay, let's get started. Number one thing is, what are all the different types of interviews we can expect in any tech interviews? So specifically in tech interviews, typically you can think of dealing with three different kinds of interviews. Now, number one is technical interview. Technical interview is nothing but same as your common data structure and algorithm related problems, or you are solving different technology specific problems, or maybe if the company is hiring for some specific roles, they might ask you technical questions regarding that. But overall, this has something to do with any piece of computer technology. Next one is the system design interview, where you are be discussing on vast array of different tools you have at your hand with your interviewer on problems such as, if you have to design your own Twitter, how would you do that? If you have to design your own Google, how would you do that? So both of these categories, technical and system design, they tend to be very, I would say for sure, very technical. On top of it, it has major implications to judge your technical skills. But last type of interview that we are going to talk about for the rest of this video, that is behavioral interview. And the purpose of behavioral interview is to make sure that are you a good culture fit or not? Do you have what it takes to basically have the right mindset and have the right correct attitude to be successful in any company? Are you able to set with the company's culture and whatnot? So first, let's understand that what behavioral interviews are. Now, behavioral interviews are nothing but a reflection of your past. If I have to put it simply, they tend to put more emphasis and more focus on what are the things you have done in the past and how have you performed. And based on that, they are going to judge you that will you be successful in the future or not. It's same as if you see any sports player, you know that whether a sports player is a good sports person or not a good sports person, depending on the recent stats, how they have performed, how well they can perform under pressure. Take any example: Cristiano Ronaldo, Lionel Messi, Virat Kohli, Sachin Tendulkar, LeBron James, Michael Jordan. We know that they are great. Why? Because we have seen them doing things in impossible condition at the top of their game when they were battered, bruised down, under pressure, performing against like the best team in the world, or maybe they were behind some odds, and still they had the attitude to go there and kill in those games. So that's how we can define that this player might be a good fit for any team that player goes to. So rather than focusing on just random things, we focus on the exact past experience that you have occurred, and that is what behavioral interviews are. Their purpose is quite simple. It is there just so that you can be judged on whether you would be a suitable person for any particular company based on the real life examples or real life situations you have faced in the past, and what was your attitude towards that, what was your approach towards that, how did you perform, what are the things you learned, so things like that. Now let's see that how behavioral interviews is going to be different than a normal traditional interview. Now, typically we all have seen the common questions that in traditional interviews, questions like, hey, where do you see yourself in 5 years? If you are a stone and you are thrown in the lake, how would you get out of it? I mean, that was a bad question, but you know the hypothetical questions, and interviewers tend to get real creative with that. These are the questions that are no longer being asked by most of the tech companies, and I assume that almost all the other companies. Why? Because they were not a good indicator or good judge of a person's true character or their attitude or their mindset. Many times you can make something up. Even if you're a good storyteller, that's it. That's all you need to be successful in these interviews. And they had no quantifiable measure or mechanism to judge whether you are a good candidate or not. So that's why behavioral interviews tend to be more focused towards the real life scenarios, real life experiences that you have faced. What type of situations you have been. Have you faced the different battles that are needed, and how did you came out victorious in all of them? So that's why the majority of focus in the behavioral interviews is always going to be on you. Tell me what you have done. Tell me what you have faced. Tell me how did you approach this situation. And that's going to be the starting point of all the questions. Now, once that is done, it is also really important that in order to judge the soft skills and problem solving abilities of a person, you judge it based on the actions they took rather than the creativity or the mental storytelling they have. It's always good to realize that what they did in that scenario and how can you judge that. So that's why the behavioral interviews, they, I wouldn't say they are completely different than traditional interviews, but I would say it's an evolutionary step to the traditional interviews, where now the more focus is towards your actual experiences. And last thing, yeah, it's one is example driven, so behavioral is example driven, and traditional is just normal random questions, so you can't do anything about that. Now the last thing, why behavioral interviews are important. We really have to understand one thing. Whenever a company decides to hire a new employee, it's actually very expensive for the company. And you must be thinking that, hey, how come is it expensive? Well, number one, in order to hire any single candidate, first they will have to post the job, then the recruiter is going to maybe browse over hundreds of resumes. I know that there are AI tools, but still they will have to browse through the correct resumes that AI has shortlisted. Then on top of that, you need to make sure that the recruiter reaches out to at least 15 or 20 candidates. Those 20 candidates are going to meet with the hiring manager. Then hiring manager is going to sort out maybe like 10 candidates. For those 10 candidates, you might have 3 rounds of interviews where they meet like 4 different people each, and each person spends maybe an hour with the other, all of these candidates. So you can imagine that how many hours just goes only for interviewing all of the different candidates, which means for a company to hire a new candidate, it is very expensive. And also think about the other thing. If some person is interviewing other person to join their team, which means that person has to be at a senior or executive level. So not only we are spending so many man hours or so many productive work hours, we are spending so many productive work hours for the people who really matter. So interviews are quite an expensive affairs whenever a company needs to hire. When next thing is, once they hire someone, it takes about 4 to 6 months to realize that whether that person was a good hire or a bad hire. So let's assume that they went through this whole process and after 6 months they realize that this person is a bad hire. It would be disastrous for them. They wasted 6 months. That person spent so much time learning all of the things that the company has to offer, and then if they had to let that person go, maybe they have to pay some severance package, and once again they would have to put all of these efforts to hire someone new. That's why companies tend to be really careful before they send out offers and extension to different people, because they really want to ensure that you are the person with the correct mindset who is going to be an asset to their team, not a liability, and especially not a major liability. So that's why they need to have an accurate prediction for any job performance. And the best way to predict someone is based on what is the work they have done in the past. So think of it like think of it like an example of the analogy of the elite sport player. For sure, you know that those players scored the goals or scored the runs or scored the baskets and created the points. That's why they value that much, because you have the quantifiable measure. Even if someone is a rookie, they still have stats on how they did in the preseason game or under 19 teams or under 16 teams, and then only they get chosen to that highest level of standard. So you really wants to be in that position, and that's why there is a huge emphasis on behavioral interviews, because this is the only interview where they can really judge whether the person is going to be perfectly good for the rest of the team. On top of it, one more thing there is that technical skills can be learned. That's a harsh and true reality of the world. Someone can be slow in technical aspects. Maybe if they spend 3 months or 6 months, they would become masters in that. They would know everything there is to know about that process or that tool. But attitude cannot be developed or changed so easily. So that's why they want to be really careful who they hire. Now next is, yeah, of course, the behavioral interviews helps to find the candidates with the right mindset, and the focus should be the right over here. And of course, it reduces the hiring biases. Why? Because now the focus is not on the interviewer. The focus is on the interviewee, which means you dictate the pace on what direction you want to take the interview in. based on your answers, they are going to ask follow-up answers. Based on your suggestions, they would be able to decide that whether you are the person with the right attitude or not. So you have all the opportunity in the world to make it or break it. So it's up to you. So of course, technical and system design interviews are important. There is no deniable in that. But the true fact is, if you make it in technical and system design, but if you don't make it in the behavioral, for sure you are not going to be selected. Even if you lack slightly on maybe technical or system design, but you kill in the behavioral interview, there is a very high chance that you might get hired based on the right attitude that you currently have. Now let's talk about the STAR method. Now let me quickly get some water because I've been speaking on and on. By the way, if any of you have any questions, feel free to write it in the chat because I'm seeing the chat. So if you want to ask me anything, yeah, just feel free to go ahead. Okay. So now let's understand that what the STAR method is. STAR method is nothing but a way to answer or articulate your thoughts for answering the questions during the behavioral interviews. Simply put, STAR method is the abbreviation for situation, task, action, and result. And this is the sequence you need to follow whenever you are answering any questions in a behavioral interview. So the thing is, for behavioral interview, the questions are going to be situational based. I already explained you. Maybe a question can be, let's assume that if you had, tell me a time when you had disagreement with your manager, how did you handle that? If that is the question, the interviewer, if I just start giving random gibberish, if I first say that what was the final result, then I say that what was the work expected of me, then I say that what was the situation, then I say that what was the thing that the manager wanted me to do and what was the thing I wanted to do, it gets jumbled up. It's like it gets spaghettified, and then it becomes really difficult for interviewer to follow that what is happening and why it's happening. So STAR method is nothing but a storytelling mechanism that not only in the interviews, but you can use it anywhere you want to. If you want to convey anything, any story, always you start with once upon a time, back in the day, this was the scenario. There used to be one young boy and young girl living on the other side of street. So this becomes your situation. And then you explain the task, and then you explain the result. And in the end, in the climax, you explain that what's going to happen. And then you show that what is the result. And result is boy and girl got married if it's a Bollywood movie. But anyways, now let's see a real life example or a real example on how would you answer based on STAR method. Okay, so once again we would consider the same question that what if you are being asked by, or your manager is asking you that if you have some disagreement, if you had some disagreement with your manager, how would you handle it? So if that is the question, first let's try to get into the situation. So you can explain the situation that, hey, at that time you had, or your company was in the process of migrating from on-premises to the cloud. So half of the services was on-premises, half were in the cloud, and you were still finalizing the strategy. At that time, your manager came up to you and asked you to complete or build a new project or new system or new application or microservice. So for that, you suggested to your manager that, hey, can we build this in the cloud? And your manager was like, no, we need this to be done right now. So can you build it on premises? And then maybe you had a disagreement on that. So that was the whole situation. And the task was that you needed to build a service and deploy it. But the question is whether to deploy it on premises or on cloud. So I gave you the situation and task, and then the disagreement was that you were suggesting that you needed to deploy it into the cloud. Your manager was suggesting to deploy in the on premises. Now, what can be done in this case? Both wants to get the product done, but both have different reasoning for that. So what was your action? What was the action you took? Maybe you can say that, hey, as part of the action, I reached out to my manager that why do you really want this to be deployed in the on-premise server when you know that even if it is, even if we deploy on the on-premises, after a few months, we will have to migrate it into the cloud. So why not just build it from the scratch and keep it cloud native and already deploy it to the cloud? It's going to be easier and more convenient in the long run. But then you realize that manager had the vision that he or she wants to get this done as quickly as possible. And you can ask, like, maybe if we delay it by a week or two and then try to make it cloud native from the scratch, then it is going to be better in the long run, because it is going to be more resilient and more stable, and plus it will be in cloud, so it will follow with the larger strategy of the company. And then as a part of action, you maybe created a roadmap where you explain that if you build on the on-premise, it's gonna be completed in 3 weeks, and if you move to the cloud, it's gonna be completed in 4 weeks. So since there is only 1 week of delay, and you try to brush through and maybe ask for 1 or 2 resources help, you try to finish this within maybe like 3.5 weeks or something, so the time frame would not be such an issue from the manager's point, and still the technology would be deployed in the cloud. So that can be your final action, and as a result, manager agreed, you came to a consensus, and finally you were able to successfully create, build and deploy application to the cloud. So result was happy, manager was happy because he wanted to get this thing done, it got completed, and you were happy because now you don't have to do the work 2 times. So this can be one of a good example of a star answer for any question. And always remember, whenever you are trying to give any answer for any particular question, make sure that you are following the star methodology, because that helps interviewer to follow along, because interviewer would be able to realize that, oh, okay, this was the situation, okay, oh, this was the disagreement, this was what needed to be done, oh, you took this action, you took this action, you took this action, and finally this was the result. Okay, so that's great, that makes sense. And whenever you talk about all the things in the star method, always make sure that you define what you did, not what the entire team did. In a project, there is going to be 15 people working. You don't want to take credit for all of that. And also it's a human tendency to give credit to all the people. But in the actual behavioral interview, the company is trying to judge that whether you are the right candidate or not. And for that, they wants to ensure that will you be able to do what you can. Oh, by the way, I just have a comment from Raj that, bro, I have completed your data structure, but I suffer while coding. Man, I suffer while coding as well. The only thing you can do is keep on practicing. So I hope this answers your question, Raj. If you keep on practicing, eventually at some point, there is going to be a click and you would be able to solve the problem. Now, once again, coming back to the behavioral interviews. So what I was talking about is always make sure that whenever you are trying to make some changes or whenever you are trying to give the answer, you always let them know that what are the things you were responsible and what were the actions you specifically took and how did that impacted the results, because that's what they are interested in. They are not interested in how did your company do and what was the overall impact on the company share prices or whatnot for the entirety or broader things. Mostly keep the focus on yourself. Okay. Now the question is, how do you prepare for this particular behavioral interviews? Number one thing you need to do is you will have to identify that what are your strengths, what are the things you are good at, and what are your weaknesses. And I'm not talking about the age-old question that tell me about your strengths and weaknesses. That is also an important question, so you should know an answer to that. But what I'm talking about is strengths can be, maybe you are really good at problem solving. Maybe you are really good at communicating. Maybe you are really good at dealing with different stakeholders. So these can be your great strength. Maybe you are good with the people. You are flexible working in a team. You can be a great help to different people. You reach out to someone and help. You leverage the work that others have done so you don't do repeated work. These are great strengths to have. And also you will need to know that what are your weaknesses. Maybe you are a procrastinator. Maybe you are scared of learning new things. Maybe you don't want things to change. Maybe you are afraid to lead a team. Maybe you are afraid to work on a project that has tight deadlines. Something. These all things can be your strengths or weaknesses. You need to identify that how can you define that these are the things I'm good at and these are the things I'm bad at. And there are a lot of good tricks and tips for that. Number one tip is always make sure that you realize or you reflect back on yourself. Whenever you did some task, you completed some action, always understand that how could have you done better? What was the new thing you learned? If you had to redo the whole thing again, how would you do it differently? If you have to teach someone, what advice would you give them? So these are going to be the qualities that would add up in your bucket, in your portfolio, or in your skill band. On top of it, always ask for the feedback. You can ask for the feedback from your manager, from your colleagues, from your co-workers, maybe someone who reports to you, someone who is under you, or maybe someone who is not from your team. Maybe you are collaborating with some other team, and then you can just meet them and ask them that, hey, do you think I could have done something better? Do you think I was lacking in some places? Feedback is a great way to realize that what are your weaknesses. Many times we are just too blind to see what is in front of us. But if someone else points it out, it becomes really easy that, hey, I need to make this change. Because think of it like coaches for any sports team. Do you think that all the current great players we have today, do their coaches were better than them in that time? No. Like Michael Jordan is the greatest basketball player in the world, like Michael Jordan, LeBron James. Do you think that is there going to be a coach who can beat them at basketball? Of course not. But there can be a coach who can say that, hey, instead of shooting at this angle or on this side, maybe if you just turn a bit and shot from this angle, your shot, the probability of shots going in would increase. And that's a whole new era for them to work upon. So that's why make sure to get positive and negative both feedbacks and work upon them. And once you understand and acknowledge your strengths and weakness, start working on them. If you know that your strength is that you are really good at communication skills, leverage that. Leverage that in an interview, leverage that in your actual job. If you know that you are weak with maybe completing things on deadline, try to complete them 2 days before the deadline. That way, even if you missed, you still have the buffering window of 2 days. There is always room for improvement. There is always something better you can do. I personally struggled with this quite a lot. So I would suggest you that the more you work on this, the better it's gonna be for your longer term period or your career. Now, on top of it, you always want to make sure that you reflect on the relevant past experiences. Now, speaking strictly for the purpose of behavioral interviews, what I would suggest you to do is at least create like 10 to 20 stories around different challenges you faced. Maybe there can be disagreements between yourself and your manager, disagreements amongst the team, maybe issues dealing with other teams, maybe issues dealing with the customer, maybe some technology problem. How did you resolve that? What are the things you learned? And just note down these stories somewhere, and just note down in like a small star format, in a bullet format, because that is going to be really helpful whenever you are trying to prepare for your interview or whenever you are sitting in an interview. The thing is, behavioral questions is not like there are no right or wrong answers. The thing is, it's only matter if you give the relevant answer for the relevant questions. And many times it's hard to recollect or recall the exact questions that was asked. So it becomes really important, and it's much better for you that if you already know it beforehand, that what was the scenario, how did you deal with it, what were the things you did to improve upon. And if you have that written list of all the questions, for sure it's gonna be really easy. Even if before an interview, if you just do a quick glance like 5 minutes before, you would at least know the different things on what you need to talk about. On top of it, many times I personally have experienced this, both as an interviewer and as an interviewee, that all the different questions somehow ended up with the same experience, and that feels really bad on yourself as an interviewer, because that means that you haven't experienced much. So why would I hire someone who haven't even experienced that much? If I ask like 10 different questions, and if you give me like 5 different scenarios maybe like 2 for each question. Still, it's a reasonable ratio that you had various set of experiences on different things, and you handled them differently, you dealt with them differently, and you learned new things. But if you can't do that, then what's even the point? So always make sure that you have relevant job experience. Now over here, there would be a question from people who are maybe in the junior level position, or who don't have much experience. How can they prepare for that? Well, if you are applying for an entry level position, the behavioral interviews tend to be slightly easier. They would not go so deep into such questions because they also realize that you don't have that much work experience. On top of it, for most of the generic questions, you can give examples from your school. Maybe how did you help out with a group project? What was your contribution? Maybe there was some new initiative that you wanted to take. How did you convince your teachers or your professors or other fellow students? What actions you took? If you had to learn a new skills, maybe you were doing, or you are studying something else, and then you suddenly became interested in learning about music. So what was your approach in that learning process? So these can be still relevant experiences if you don't have specific professional work life experience. So never say never. Always try to come up with your experience and your answer, and it will always be helpful. Now let's see that how can you structure your experiences for the interview storytelling. And for that, you already know the answer: STAR method. For all the experiences, note down the experience and then note down the situation, what was the task, what was the action, and what was the result, and what did you learn from that. Always have all of these things ready, and then you would be golden. Now let's go and dive deep into the job requirements, because for every single job that you are going to appear for an interview, there is always going to be a job description. Job description is your friend. Always make sure to go over the job description and realize, because previously in the job description, they only used to fill out with just like technological requirements that they needed. But since last, I guess 3 to 4 years, I'm seeing that they explicitly specify that what are going to be the general day-to-day duties. So always make sure to go over all of those, understand those requirements, and then based on that, create the entire portfolio. Like realize that, okay, this company has these kinds of responsibility. Maybe I'm applying for a senior manager level position or a director level position, which means I'm going to be leading a team of 10 or 15 people. Maybe I'm working in like a product sales department, so I might have to deal with a lot of consumers or customers. So expect questions around those areas, because it makes logical sense that, hey, if we are hiring you to sell mangoes, are you able to sell bananas or apples? Do you have that selling experience? And if you do, then tell us about it. So that helps you predict the answers in an easier manner. So analyze your job description. On top of it, after analyzing the job description, use the AI. AI is your friend. So ask maybe ChatGPT or Bing Chat or Bard or whatnot that, hey, for this job description, what do you think are some of the most important soft skills that are needed? Note down those soft skills, then go to your list of relevant experience that you have already written down or created. See that what is the matching point, and then you will have a generic idea of what type of questions can be asked, what should be your answer, and how can you do well in an interview. Plus, feel free to reach out to the recruiter or the hiring manager when you speak with them for the first time, that what are the company values, what are the things that I need to take care of, because company culture and company values are one of the most important things whenever the companies are trying to hire some candidates. And many companies have very unique cultures. So they have those criteria set in a very, I would say, explicit manner, that these are the company criteria that an individual has to meet. Then only we would think about hiring them or moving to the next stage. So you can check with the hiring manager or recruiter that, hey, how does the working looks like? How do you judge the impact? How can I produce more value? How would I be calculated if I were to get hired? Ask these questions. These are interesting questions, and these questions allow the interviewer or recruiter to say good things about their company as well, which they would be really happy, and it leaves a good impact that you are interested in learning that how does company function on a day-to-day basis with their employees. Plus, do your research. Go to websites like LinkedIn or Glassdoor. Go to blogs on Reddit. Maybe go to or try to find some YouTube videos, because there will always be someone who must have provided all of these information. On top of it, make sure that the company's values and your personal values are in coordinate with each other. Most of the times, most of the companies I've seen, they all tend to have pretty common similar values. They tend to be like ethical employers. They wanted to take care of their customers. They want to build best products. They want all of their teams to run at maximum efficiency. They want to achieve good amount of productive results, and they want to make sure that there are no interpersonal issues between the employees. The employees are working in like a team like manner, and everyone respects each other, and everyone has like a purpose to drive forward their company's agenda. So yeah, you can do that. Now let's try to understand this with couple of case studies, and this one is one of my favorite case study, that is Netflix. Let me drink some water. I'm getting really thirsty. Okay, so Netflix is quite a unique company. And how it is a unique company? Because if you see all the other companies, like take any company, right? Netflix was one of the very first initial companies that created these like tech sort of different compensation, better employee serving needs, and better great benefits and stuff like that. What Netflix previously had was they only had one level across the entire company, that was senior software developer. Like there would be people with varying experiences, but they only used to hire senior people. Now they have started hiring freshers as well, but still there are very low levels. Like there is not that 10 different levels or 10 different layers of employees. It's very little. Next thing is that they treat their employees as I would say adults. So they would be like, we understand that as an employee you are an adult to make your own decision. You would do what's best for you and what's best for the company, and they give them great freedom. Like you can take as many days off as you want. They pay some of the highest salaries in the world. So they pay somewhat around like 550,000 on an average for a senior software developer, which is like nearly 20 to 30 times more, 20 to 30% more than all the other companies. So you can imagine, like almost more than $500,000. It's quite huge amount of money. Plus they treat their teams or their employees as if they are part of some elite team. And you know how elite team functions. Like every player must do their part. They are doing so that the team can win the game. They are doing the best they can. They have a coach who is always there encouraging them. They are given the best tools, best technologies, whatever they want to do, but they want to have those championships, those results. They want to make sure that all the employees, not only they are behaving as an adult, but they are also pulling in their weight. They are doing all the things that are necessary and that are needed for them to do. On top of it, they have something that is very important, that is called a keeper's test. What a keeper's test is that manager is always asked this question, that if your employee, let's say a manager has 5 employees reporting to him, the question for the manager would be that if employee number 1 or employee number 2 decides to leave Netflix today, will you fight to keep that employee in Netflix, or would you let that employee go? And if the answer is that I would let that employee go, then that means you don't want to keep that employee. So the mentality of Netflix is, if you don't want to keep the employee because that employee is no longer a member of elite sports team, why should we even keep that person? Why don't we just let him or her go? And it's not like they lay off people abruptly. They would pay like great severance package, and they would let them go with dignity and with huge like nice amount of salary, and they would always have room to come back if they improve upon on the things that they were let go of. But still they have this unique keepers test that happens at Netflix, that they are really huge on being very honest about the performance of their employees. And you know, the interesting thing about Netflix is they don't give bonus. All the other companies give bonus, but Netflix is like, we are going to pay highest amount of salaries. Even in the salary, we are not going to decide that, hey, you will get 20% stock or 30% stock and you should do this and that and whatnot. It's be like, you choose that, do you want the $550,000 everything as base salary? Do you want like maybe 50% stocks and 50% as salary? Maybe you want 90% stock and 10% salary? You decide, because you are an adult, you are the member of the elite sports team. The only thing we want is that you keep on giving Netflix everything based on the efficiency. And of course, it's not like they make you work like 15 hours a day. They have solid work-life balance, but still you will have to ensure that you perform really good. So that's quite unique thing about Netflix. Now, next thing about Netflix is they have great feedback culture. So whenever you do anything, they are always going to give you a feedback on what are the things you did right, what are the things you did wrong. No matter, even if you are a fresh hire or even if you are in Netflix for 10 years, anyone can give feedback to anyone. It should be honest and it should be genuine, and it should not be like in an angry tone. It's just like normal conversation, but they are very honest about it. So if you are given regular feedback about your performance, the odds of you doing better significantly improves, and that's what they are huge on. So if I'm personally preparing an interview for Netflix and I am preparing for behavioral interviews, what type of questions should I expect? Well, of course, I should expect on a time where I was lacking in something, and how did I improve on myself? Or maybe I had to give or let someone know from my team or higher up in the chain that they were wrong, and convince them about something. Or maybe how can I incorporate the feedback I received about some things, and how I made changes, how I made the improvements. So these are the questions. Like maybe if there was some new initiative that needed to be done, how did I was involved in getting the things done? Because again, elite sports team member, which means every member is trying to do what is best for the company. Even if it's a tough thing to do or a tough job, someone needs to get it done. So that's good. Now, after understanding Netflix case study, let's understand the second case study, that is for Amazon. So once again, Amazon, again, another pretty good company, one of the biggest hire or one of the biggest company in the world, especially in the tech. They have huge amounts of product. Now I know whenever I say Amazon, there are all of these different opinions about different things, and I don't want to get into debate of that. I strictly want to focus on the technology aspect and seeing that as a tech company. So Amazon has quite a unique culture where they focus quite a lot on the leadership principles. And what these leadership principles are, the mission statements of what Amazon wants to do. So it's like customer obsession, or think big, or dive deep, or how can you strive to become the best employer of the world. How can you define that you are going to hire and develop the best things and best people? How can you do that? So all the questions that typically anyone has to face during the Amazon hiring process, that they would be asked some questions amongst these leadership principles. So there are like 16 leadership principles. So it's not like that they are going to ask 16 questions, one from each. The number of questions can vary, but more than likely you are going to be asked somewhere between like 8 to 10 leadership principle questions. And these questions are not going to be like that, hey, tell me a time when you basically learn and be curious. No, it's not like that. The questions would be framed about something else. But if I'm preparing for an Amazon job, what I would do is I would go through my experiences, and I would see that how can I have separate experience for each of the leadership principle, and how can I curate my answer around that. So that would be a good way to prepare for Amazon interview. Maybe if you are applying for Microsoft, so Microsoft has a mission statement that empower every single person and organization in the world. So maybe you can, even if you have few lines about that, on how the changes you made in the past job have impacted like a significant group of people or number of employees, whatnot, that would be a good thing to say. So that's how researching your, so what you need to do is, number one, understand what the STAR technology or STAR methodology is. Next, realize or make the list of all the questions or all the experiences that you have faced so far. After that, realize that what are your strengths and weaknesses, how can you improve upon your weaknesses. Take the feedback from different people. Always keep on writing about the new stuff as it happens, because it's very easy to forget many times. Next, whenever you apply for any particular job, go through the job description, reach out to the recruiter, make sure to ask the question that what is the company culture like, what are the things expected, and how does employees behave on a day-to-day basis. Once you have that, do research for that company's typical culture. Go to their company's website, go that about us page, or maybe go to LinkedIn, Glassdoor. There are a lot of different applications or a lot of different resources available to you. So these would be the common scenarios. Now let's dive deeper into the actual meat of the problem or actual meat of the course, where we are going to talk about that all of the behavioral interviews question categories, and then we would start talking about different questions and what is the intent behind those questions, how can you answer those questions. Okay, so the number one category is teamwork. Companies really wants to know that are you a team player or not, can you collaborate with others. So expect some questions related to teamwork. Next one is your problem solving abilities, that they really wants to check that do you have what it takes to come up with pretty interesting solutions for weird problems that can occur or could occur or had occurred in the past. Are you adaptable to the change? Because change is the only constant in the world, and it's especially true for the tech industry. Next one is, do you have the right communication skills? So communication skills include like written communication, oral communication, how do you behave, how do you convey your thoughts, how do you come up with the solutions and whatnot, all of the things combined. And the last one is the leadership quality, that do you have the correct leadership quality. And the last category is especially important for the higher or senior level folks. For typically like junior level folks, it doesn't matter that much. But anyways, now let's just start talking about that for each one of these. So number one thing is teamwork. So they wants to check that are you able to work in different teams, individual teams, how do you behave if like some of your teamwork co-workers are not doing what you can. Are you can you cooperate with all of them? Do you have the correct empathy to realize that what is the situation for those employees on why they are behaving in that manner or that such manner? And do you have the open-mindedness to understand or take in the feedback? Maybe you could, there can be something that you might be doing wrong. And okay, just a second, there is one more question that I'm just reading on the chat. Correct answer for the So Raj, reporting any particular manager is like the last of the last thing you should be doing, unless the manager is doing something very rude or very bad or harassment. Then you should report him, like him or her. But if there are some scenarios where you are making some changes or you are having some issues, like always communicate with the manager. Most of the time communication would solve the problem. If communication doesn't solve the problem, maybe try to understand their perspective. If that also doesn't solve the problem, maybe try to speak with their manager, so like one level above, and that should pretty much solve the issue. If that still does not solve the issue, then go to the HR or report it. But you really wants to make sure that you are doing the right thing, because if you are doing it out of spite, then it can ruin your career or it can ruin someone else's career. Plus you would be burning the bridges between yourself and the manager quite significantly. So make sure that before you report someone, you are sure that that is the last resort, unless the manager is harassing you, and that can be any sort of harassment, like physical harassment, mental harassment. If that is the case, for sure go ahead and report them. You should not be tolerating toxicity at any workplace. Okay, now let's come back to our behavioral interview side, and that is problem solving skills. So for the problem solving, they need to know that do you have the creativity, do you have the logical reasoning, do you have the critical thinking about solving the problems, thinking about what can be the different solutions, how can you approach any given unique situation, what should be your approach, and things like that. So always make sure that whenever there will be questions about that, how did you deal with a difficult problem, how did you deal with a difficult technology or difficult process, what did you came up with, if you are short on resources, how would you improvise, and things like that. So there will always be questions related to problem solving, and that you need to make sure that you are doing, or you can answer those questions correctly. And plus, this is a great point for you to become creative in your answers as well. Because if there was some really critical problem and really annoying problem that was bothering you too much, or your customers too much, you can still make some changes and come up with some wonderful results. So that's always pretty good. Next thing is adaptability. Are you a person who can adapt to different situation? How can you deal with the change? How quickly can you understand? Do you have what it takes? Have you done this in the past? How did you do it and whatnot? So this becomes the testament of your resiliency, your flexibility, and your agility. That are you the person who can fit in different teams, different orgs, maybe different projects, different managers, different technology? If you did that in the past, how would you do that? How would you learn that? What is your process of learning for learning new things? That is an important thing to realize in this case. Next one is communication. So for the communication, you always want to make sure that are you articulate in what your answer, what type of soft skills you have, do you have the correct way to understand the problem and communicate it betterly. And one very important skill for the communication is actually the art of listening. Now this is something I personally suffered quite a lot, so I wouldn't lie that it's something that I can come up with. I'm a very bad listener, so I had to do like quite a lot of work to improve upon that. I had this bad habit of interrupting other people, and that worked quite against me in a lot of situations. So a great communicator or a great speaker has to be a great listener. This is a prerequisite. So if you can't listen and if you can't ingest everything properly, you can't become good at communication. So always have that skill. And pretty important part of any company is how you deal with bureaucracy. Now I know that companies hates bureaucracy, and it brings the efficiency down and it causes all sorts of issues. But the reality is that there is still going to be some form of bureaucracy in different teams. So you will always need to make sure that you are handling things in a diplomatic scenario. You have those diplomatic skills to work with different teams. Maybe there has been some bad history amongst teams where they can't work with each other because, I don't know, some products broke down, or maybe one team keeps on blaming the other team and other team keeps on blaming one team for not being the efficiency level that they want. So in that case, you need to be diplomatic if you have to work with them. So always put the previous biases aside and try to focus on the work you are trying to get done. And that, in my experience, I have felt that would be the best approach to get the projects moving or get the wheels turning. Okay. And now the last thing is leadership. So do you have the leadership abilities to fix the things, make the changes, bring those changes home, and help other people, bring other people and be the reason for their success as well. So these are all the abilities you want to make sure. On top of that, the companies really wants to know that are you an accountable person? If you are handled or some responsibility, can you take care of it, and can you be the person who can be held accountable if it's successful or if it's unsuccessful? So in both the scenarios, always make sure, like there is a very good story by Dr. APJ Abdul Kalam, who was like the president of India and also used to work at Indian Space Research Organization. Like he mentioned that there was one mission that was pretty critical and that satellite launch failed. So at that time, he was the project manager and it was his responsibility that the project failed. But still, the director of ISRO came out and said that the director took the whole blame, said that it's my fault because the project failed. And because, so that showed great leadership, that he was actually taking the accountability of the failure of the project and shielded APJ Abdul Kalam. And Abdul Kalam remembered that and always felt that gratitude. And later, after like couple of years, they relaunched the same satellite and it was successful again. So this is a good example of leadership. And you should always try to develop this quality, that can you be held responsible, accountable, can you take care of the new initiatives or existing initiative, bring them to the finish line and do it in an efficient manner, plus help all of your team members to grow in their own careers as well, because we are only as strong as the weakest link. So you want to make sure that. And you, of course, for sure, if you are in the leadership position, you will need to know what you are going to do after 6 months, what you are going to do after 1 year, what you are going to do after 5 years, or like not 5 years, but at least like 6 months to a year or 2 years. That you should have that long elongated vision, so you can make strategies and you can create policies according to that. So yeah, these are basically the main categories. Now let's go to the most important part, that is 50 behavioral interview questions. For the 50 behavioral interview questions, we want to focus on all the categories. So what we have did is that amongst all the 5 categories that we just discussed, I took 10 questions each. These are like pretty common, pretty popular and very logical questions. Many times you would feel that many questions are repeating from one category or another category, and that's because behavioral interview in itself is a very close affair. A lot of times one situation or one type of question can apply to another situation or another type of questions as well. So that's why you will have to have that fluidity and mindfulness depending on the question, that hey, is this something I want to do, or is this something how I'm going to deal with. So you will need to have that fluidity and that the persona in the moment, like someone like Better Call Saul, that used to be pretty good. So yeah, so these 50 questions are going to be covering most of the topics that we are going to talk about. Again, these are the questions that I'm going to tell you what is the intention, what type of answer they might expect, maybe give some sample examples for some of the questions, not all of the questions for sure. And you make sure that if you are faced with such question, think that how would you answer these questions. So you can think of that on your own. And any single question that is being asked in a behavioral interview, always there is going to be a follow-up question. So always be prepared for the follow-up based on whatever you do. Now, one piece of advice I would really like to give you is be honest. Whenever you write the stories, be honest. Whenever you prepare for it, be honest, because if you honestly answer the question, you won't have to think about it. It would be coming from the inside, and whatever the follow-up questions the interviewers would ask, you would be able to answer them correctly. Because many times, in order to answer the question, you can make up some story. But interviewers are not dumb. They are not fools. They would realize that, hey, if you are making any issues, or if you are just bluffing around, fooling around, they will eventually catch you. And if they catch you doing that, that's it. You are done. Because you just proved that you are the person with the least amount of integrity. So never do that. Always be honest and be genuine, and that will come in really handy for a lot of scenarios. Okay. So now let's first start talking about questions related to teamwork and collaboration. So the number one question is describe a situation where you had to work with a team and how did you contribute. Of course, you can give a lot of examples on any project that you were working on. Maybe you had to join a new team to complete some project. Maybe you joined a new company and how did you cope up. Maybe you had to bring in new members, or maybe you had to form your own team to get some initiative completed. There can be a lot of examples. You can say that you were contributing to the team by helping them out with the technology problems, plus you started creating like these weekly or bi-weekly retroactive sessions to realize that where everyone is and how, if everyone has new scenarios, how can they make changes. What were your contribution? That is the important part. How did you contribute? So always have that distinction between what the team did and what you did. Next question is, tell me a time when you have to deal with a difficult client or a difficult coworker. So yeah, if you are dealing with some product and you are directly dealing with the client might be unhappy with your product, with your company, or with some past experiences. So you will have to take care of that. You can explain that with the client. You try to explain that why this is the situation. You promise them to correct that, and then you corrected that in this manner, in this time frame, and you gave the commitment and you follow through. So eventually client became happy or okay or understanding. Maybe with the coworker, they were being hostile towards you, so you reached out to the coworker that, hey, what's the issue? And then you talked and you realized, or you asked for the feedback, and you realized that this was the problem the coworker was having. You worked upon that and you came up to a consensus, you solved the problem. So this can be a very good answer. You can also say that if things go really out of hand, maybe you try to get suggestion from other team members or some other senior fellows that, hey, I'm facing this situation, what do you think I should do? Which means you are seeking out for advice from outside of the team in order to deal with a difficult situation, which is always a good sign. Next question is, can you describe a time when you had to deal with a team member who wasn't pulling their weight? Very real scenario, and of course can happen to any team. I personally experienced something like this back like early in my career, where we had one of the team members who, like, he was a good team member. He was working really well, doing all sorts of things. And suddenly, like, that team member was not, like, he was late on his commitments. He was not completing the things that were expected of him. And everyone was getting frustrated. So I, like, out of friendship, I reached out to him that I was like, hey man, is everything okay? Are you fine? Do you need some help? And then I realized that that person had a very close family member stuck in hospital for like last week or so. And that person was really anxious. They couldn't focus on their work. Plus they had some other priorities with some other team on a different project, and then everything got combined. So initially I had the bias that maybe they are just slacking or not wanting to do their work. But after I asked them, I realized that, oh, this is a very real and genuine scenario. So I reached out to the manager, I reached out to the scrum master saying that this is what the employee is facing. So manager gave them like a week off. They are like, take care of your family, work can come in later. And then we, amongst all the other remaining team members, we distributed the work that team member was supposed to do. So we dealt with that situation and we dealt with empathy in that situation. Now, if you realize that in some scenario, the employee you are working with is completely not doing their job and they are just lazy or slacking off, maybe you can try to communicate with them. If you still don't see any improvement, you can escalate the issue to your manager. So there can be a lot of different approaches, and depending on what answer you will give, interviewer is going to come back with a follow-up. That is a given rule. It's like Newton's fourth law, that what you say, interviewer will say something back. Okay, now next thing is, how do you handle a situation where you disagree with your supervisor? So yeah, again, this can be related to the story I told you earlier about like having disagreement with the manager, where you realize you try to hear the point of view of the manager, you try to hear the point of view, or you try to explain the point of view of yourself. You see where is the disagreement, communicate, understand the trade-offs, see the pros and cons of each approach, try to come up with an approach that is going to be in consent with both you and the manager, and that would be the most efficient approach. And that is how you should answer this type of question. And next one is that describe when you had to use your understanding to lead a team. So again, maybe if you are at a junior level, you can give some example that I was pretty fresh at leading team and I didn't know much, but these were the steps I took. I took feedback from the team. I consistently check in with them. I try to keep them motivated. I try to show them that this is what we need to do. This is the target we are planning. Try to make sure that we are on the correct timeline. Not micromanage quite a lot, because no one likes micromanagement. So these are the things you can show, and you can explain that this was my experience with leading a team. Now let's see the next question, that is, can you please talk about a time when you had to coordinate with different departments to complete a project? Again, very real scenario. Many times you must be seeing that you will have to deal with a lot of different sorts of departments or teams that are responsible for different things. How do you coordinate with them? How do you understand with them? Maybe there is a time difference. Maybe your one team is located in India, another team is located in US. How do you deal with the time difference? How do you come up with a common consensus? So there are a lot of things you can talk about, and the intent of this question is to make sure that you are comfortable working across the board on different teams, not only just with your teams, which for sure you are going to do in any job you are going to work at. Now, next question is, tell me about a time when you had to rely on your presentation skills to influence someone's opinion. The purpose of this question is to realize that, can you persuade other people? Can you convince other people on what you wanted to, and can you present your ideas in a sophisticated manner? So presentation can be anything. Maybe you create like a very nice PowerPoint presentation. Maybe you created a whole demo. Maybe you created like different charts and everything, and you showed that what are the different options and how one option is better than the other option. Maybe you came up with some metrics. Maybe you had to present something to the consumer and convince them to buy your product. So there are ideas are endless, and you pick one, whatever you can. But the purpose of this question is very simple. Now, question number 8 is, describe a situation where you had to resolve an interpersonal conflict at work. So maybe you realize that couple of employees, they don't get well with each other. Maybe there was some bad blood. Maybe there were some issues. Maybe some teams that don't go well with each other. How can you resolve that issue? Maybe you can if you are a team manager and you realize that your team is not performing in accordance with each other, how can you improve their morale? Maybe you can try to motivate them. Maybe you can come up with some interesting solutions, maybe like some team building activity, maybe like company lunch, employee lunches, maybe employee recognition, or maybe try to come up with like some games idea, reach out to each member of the team, or create like these discussions amongst the team in like round table discussion to see that how would they feel like improving on their skills. So there are a lot of things you can actually do whenever you are trying to resolve some interpersonal conflicts at work. Next one is, how do you approach working in a diverse and inclusive team environment? This, in my opinion, if you get this question, this is like a free hit. Why? Because the answer is quite subtle. There are great benefits of working in diverse and inclusive teams, because you work with different groups of people from different background, different cultures, different upbringing, different experience in the world, different perspective. Benefits are endless. And because of that, the project or product you are trying to work on would be significantly better, just because you have diverse group of people working on it. Let me give you an example. Like around when the scientists were developing the prototype for the dummies that you see that are used for car crash testing, at that time they maybe they had some unconditional bias or something. They created dummies based on typical European male. That's it. And then they started crash testing the cars, and then they started making improvements on the car, and then those cars started coming into the public, and then a lot of people were traveling in those cars. It turned out, because the dummies were just specifically designed for typical European males, it turned out that those safety mechanisms were not quite convincing for small children or teenagers or women or pregnant women, older folks. And that caused a lot of deaths. Now, I'm not saying that those scientists had some preconceived notion that this is how a dummy should be and this is what we are going to do. They wanted to do something good for the world. But because their perspective was quite limited and quite narrow, though they had good intentions, they were they became responsible for deaths of so many people. And that's a harsh reality. So many deaths or so many lives could have been saved if they had like a more broader, diverse and inclusive team. So that's why if you see any such kind of questions like this, oh boy, you can blow the minds of the interviewer with all the answers. So this was just like my example of what I can say, but you can have your own answer. Okay, next one is, can you give me an example where you have to motivate others? So once again, you can say that there was some project that you were trying to do, but you realize that project is not gonna end in time. So you had to ask for more resources, or you had to motivate the existing team members to maybe just like push through and try to get the things done. Realize that what would be the achievement once you get there. Maybe you will learn something new skill. It would be huge for the company or for you or for your team. So yeah, and there are a lot of motivation mechanisms. There are some rewards you can have. You can also have like always recognizing the good work any employee did. Even a small gesture can have large impact. So always make sure that that's where Netflix shines, in my opinion. They have great feedback culture, both in good feedback and also bad feedback. So they'll always be like, yeah, hey buddy, you did the good job. And that's all sometimes a person needs in order to do good job. So I think these 10 questions sum up all the questions related to teamwork and collaboration. Now let's move on to the next topic, that is problem solving. By the way, let me know in the comments on how quickly am I going on? Am I going too fast? Am I going too slow? Or do you think maybe is there something I can do to improve my delivery? So feel free to write that in the comment. I'm reading the comments on the side as well. And let me get a glass of sip of water, because I just spoke long and long. Okay, so that's cool. Now let's talk about problem solving skills. So for the problems, first question is, describe a project where you had to use problem solving skills. Man, there can be a lot of things. Maybe the technology you were using was not very good. Maybe the solution you were using was not very good. The procedure you had was not very good. You had to be creative. Maybe there was something you didn't like or you were frustrated and you tried to come up with a solution. Because purpose of asking this question is quite simple. They wanted to know that how different can you think and how do you deal with challenges whenever you are faced with some adverse situation. Can you come up with the proper problem solving methods? So for that, this is the question. Okay, next one is, tell me about a time when you made mistakes and how did you handle it. Now, I would not believe you if you say that you have never made a mistake. Every single person learns from the mistake, so that's why you should have this answer specifically curated based on your experience. Because the only purpose of asking this question is quite simple, that are you a person who keeps on making the same mistake again, or are you a person who learns from every single mistake they make? There is a great saying that company should encourage employees to make as many mistakes as they can just once, and that company would become so much better at what they do. Because with every mistake, the employees will start to learn and make things better, make things better, make things better. That's why you see like a lot of superheroes are good at what they do. Like, have you seen Iron Man? The first Iron Man suit was pretty good for the first Iron Man film, but it was garbage for the long run. So that's why if you think about it, always try to learn from your mistakes and explain this in very good manner. Next question is, describe a situation where you had to be particularly attentive to details and how did you handle that. So many times you might be working on some sensitive things, sensitive data or some sensitive application, where you need to make sure that any mistakes you do can be very costly for the company. So how can you be attentive? And the purpose of asking this question is quite simple. They wants to know that after you are done with your work, what more extra cautious steps you take to make sure that you didn't made any mistakes. You can say things like, yeah, I would double check my work, plus I would have it peer reviewed, plus maybe there can be some automated tools that you are going to run against to make sure that you didn't miss anything up. Maybe you might have a QA team, so you will ask the QA team to thoroughly test out all the scenarios and all the different probabilities. You can also have some third party audits or third party QAs to do the testing and give you the certificate that whether your solution is correct or not. So these are the additional steps you can take in order to make sure that you are being attentive to detail for all the things you're trying to solve. Now let's go to the question number 14. Can you talk about a time when you had to persuade others to see the things your way? That's quite interesting, because many times you might be in a problematic situation, or there might be some process that you don't like, and you have to convince your manager, maybe his manager, maybe their other stakeholders, maybe some consumers, to do things the way you want it to do. For that, the purpose of asking this question is very simple. The interviewer wants to know that are you the person who can make that judgment call before you decide that I want to pursue other. Because for sure, for after this question, the follow-up question is going to be that why did you decide to pursue them? Did you had the concrete evidence here that your approach was correct? And for that, you always wants to make sure that you keep this thing in your back of your mind, because many times the solutions you are suggesting to pursue others might have think about it, or if they haven't think about it, why they haven't think about it, or why they decided not to do it, and what was your reasoning on doing it, how did you convince them. So they would want to know these things. And next thing is, tell me about a time when you showed initiative at work. Once again, very simple thing. The purpose is to see that whenever you see a problem, do you take that first step to solve it? Are you taking the initiation? Are you convincing other? How did you do about it? What was your approach being that? And give some examples regarding that. So the purpose of this question is quite common, and the answers can be quite a lot. Maybe you had some manual deployment mechanisms that you never like, and you took an initiative to create a prototype for the first CI/CD pipeline for your project, and then that became the norm. So that can be a good example, and things like that. So any initiative you took, you can explain, and then you can go deeper into your experiences. Okay, next question is, describe a situation where you had to take the lead on a project. So now, number one, the thing is, purpose for this question is to make sure that you realize that why you had to take the lead. Wasn't there a project lead or tech lead already? Maybe they got sick or they left the company and you had to take the lead. How did you do things differently? What was your experience? What were the things you learned? What was your experience as working under a team and then leading a team? So these can be the follow-up questions. And the purpose of asking is that how was your approach on dealing with different people while leading a project or leading a team? So again, pretty nice question to ask in an interview, if you ask me. Next is, can you give an example of time when you went above and beyond your job duties? This question is actually tricky in both ways. Number one, they wants to see your commitment, that are you committed to the cause or to the project that you are trying to build, or to the project that you wanted to complete. Number two, are you going to lie in this kind of situation? Some people would be like, yeah, I was in a situation where I had to work like 14 hours a day for 7 days for like 6 weeks to complete this. Maybe they did, but more than likely they might not have done that. And interviewers can pretty easily judge that this person may be exaggerating on this. If not, if you genuinely did something that was above and beyond, explain that why you had to go that above and beyond. Maybe the project was not managed properly, or maybe you did not have sufficient resources from the beginning. Maybe the responsibilities change. How did you incorporate that? And what did you learn from that? If you had to do all of this again, what are the things you would do differently? So these would be the follow-up questions, and the purpose of asking this question is quite simple. They want to see your commitment levels and also your honesty. Okay, next thing is, tell me about a time when you had to innovate to solve a problem. Well, now we are diving deeper into the realm of doing smart things in a better way. And how can you innovate? Maybe you innovated something on the technology side, maybe you innovated something on the existing code base, maybe some tools you were using, maybe you incorporated like automation, maybe you incorporated automatic testing, maybe you incorporated like monitoring and alerting, automatic incident creation. There are a lot of scope for innovation and improvement. So you can tell about that time, and companies really wants to know, because if you are an innovative person who do things smartly and efficiently, companies would really want to hire you. So make sure to give justification to this question. Next is, describe a time when you had to make a tough decision quickly. Okay, now this is a good question, but this is also sort of a trap. How this is a trap? Because they wanted to know that did you consider all the risk before making that decision, and if the decision was tough, why you were in the situation, what were your considerations, what were the thoughts going behind the scenes, what were the whole situation, how it was made complicated, why it was there in that for the first place. So you will have to realize these things before you start making start making judgment calls. So make sure to consider all of these things while answering that. And the next thing is, how do you approach learning a new skill or technology? And you will need to provide it with an example. Pretty simple. As an IT person, everyone has to learn new things every 6 months to a year. Maybe new language, new technology, new cloud environment, new tools, new AI, whatnot. So give the example, show them the way that how do you actually learn, what is your learning methodology, and then there can be a lot of follow-up questions. But overall, the purpose of this question is to make sure that you are not a rigid person that gets stuck to what you are, and just explain that you are not a tree, you are a human. You can move from a place to place or skill to skill, technology to technology, and you are eager to learn new things. Okay, now we are moving to the next set of questions, that is adaptability. So the question is, tell me about a time when you had to adapt to a significant change in workplace. What was the significant change? Why did it bring into the picture? How did you adjust it to it? What did you do to accommodate better? Did you help someone else to adjust as well? These are the things you can consider. The purpose of asking this question is that immediately once you answer this question, you can actually ask a follow-up question to the team as well, that are you expecting some significant change to come in picture for the company you are applying to, and that can take the conversation in a better way. So it's always good to have a back and forth conversation with your interviewer. Don't have it like a monotonous that just a question is being thrown at you and you just answer and that's it, you just sit silently. Be active, be interactive in the communication, ask questions, it would be helpful. Okay, next is, describe a situation where you had to gather information from multiple sources. How did you determine which information was most relevant? That's a pretty common scenario whenever multiple teams worked on the same project, and maybe one team did one change, the other team did other change, and then you had to make something else in the future, and you had to reach out to multiple places to gather the same piece of information. So the purpose of asking this question is to realize that can you deal with different people or different teams and make judgment calls based on the information you are provided. You can say something like, you had to reach to different teams, you find multiple copies of the information, then you decided to go into the source code to verify which one is the most up to date. Once you identified that, you discarded all the copies or you archived all the historical copies, and make sure that for the next person who is looking for the information, they can find it easily. So you made those provisions. This can be a great answer. Okay, next is, can you talk about a time when you had to work under pressure? The question is trying to define that can you work under pressure or do you break under pressure? And number two, if you are under pressure, does it inherent your judgment or does it cloud your judgment, or you can still function the way you were? Plus, being under pressure doesn't mean that you should always stay under pressure. How do you calm yourself down? How do you calm the stakeholders down? So these can be the follow-up questions. Next is, how do you handle meeting tight deadlines? I personally struggled with this, so I can give you an example that previously I was having some issues meeting the deadlines. So I personally decided that instead of having the actual deadlines, I would set the deadlines 2 days before the actual deadlines. So that was like a way for me to cope up, and even in case I missed. And slowly I started to keep track of all the deadlines that I would have missed, and I started to reduce that number. So eventually I became much more like I would say efficient with the task I was taking on and the deadlines I was dealing with. Plus, previously I was taking on too many things on my plate, so which means I couldn't justify any one of them. So then I started to better allocating my work and my time depending on the priorities and the initiatives I had at hand, and that helped me quite a lot with meeting, not only meeting tight deadlines, but also completing the work in the efficient manner. Next is, describe a time when you had to learn something new in a short period and how did you manage? So once again, I think we already discussed this problem, and you can just explain that where you needed to learn something pretty quickly. Maybe there was some change in the standard, or maybe there was some vulnerability you found in your existing code base that you had to move away from on a very fast basis. So you can give those examples. Okay. Now let's go to question number 26. Tell me about a time when you had to adapt your communication style to suit a particular audience. Maybe you can talk about a time where you had to, I don't know, work in a different country, different culture, or clients from different culture, because North American working style is very different than European working style, than African working style, or Japanese working style, Indian working style. Maybe you had to deal with cross-functional teams. So you had to realize that what kind of cultural things that you need to take care of, what kind of pronunciation that you need to take care of. Maybe you reach out to other team members for their advice and guidance on how to go about that. So this can be a great example, and this type of question can typically be asked in like multinational companies that have to deal with a lot of different like clientele or different teams who have different customs and methods, and you might have to adjust your communication style or way. Plus, if you're communicating with someone from the VP level or from business level, your communication pattern would be different. If you're speaking with someone maybe like a principal architect or a tech lead, you would speak in a different manner. If you're speaking with someone from like a scrum master or maybe your own coworker, you would speak in a different sense. If you are teaching or communicating with the interns, you would communicate in the different style, different pattern. So you can make that judgment call. But yeah. Okay, next is question number 27. Describe an instance where you had to work with limited resources. Always everyone wants to do everything the best way possible, but in terms of resources, there are always going to be some shortcomings. So how do you deal with it? How do you maximize the resource allocation? This is what this question is trying to ask you. And there can be a lot of answers for this. Maybe you decide that you are going to make sure that throughout the across team, you distribute the resource in the most adequate and efficient manner. Maybe you have equity amongst the resources you are trying to work with. If there are funding issues, how do you deal with it? If there are tech skills issues, how do you deal with it? If maybe some resources from your team suddenly left out, how did you dealt with that? So there can be a lot of answers for this. Question number 28. Can you talk about a long-term project you manage? How did you keep everything moving along in a timely manner? So this is a very genuine scenario, because many times in the long running projects, you have the teams that change, you have the requirements that change, you have the technology that change, maybe suddenly the priorities change. So how do you keep everything intact? How do you keep everything in manner? Number one, You plan for these changes while planning for the project. Number two, you constantly recheck the roadmap and the timelines. Number three, you always constantly check that the current progress you make. Are you on time? Are you on budget? What are the shortcomings you are expecting in the upcoming recent future? If you are deviating from your goals, how quickly can you adjust the timelines and things like that? So always make sure to answer or be ready to answer all of these questions. Okay, question number 29. Tell me about a time when you had to balance competing priorities and how did you handle it? That's a very real life scenario and probably very important question, because many times in many different companies, you might there might be two different product owners coming at to you saying that, hey, my priority is more urgent, my priority is more urgent, I want this done yesterday, I want this done yesterday. How do you manage that? You try to make a judgment call. You realize that which has later deadlines. You try to realize the workload. Maybe can you see that, can you delegate some workload to some other peer of yours? If you want additional resources, reach out to your manager and try to think of all of these scenarios. Try to think that why these are competing priorities. Is there one priority higher than the other one? And then you will find the answers depending on these scenarios. Next one is, describe a situation where you had to be patient in order to achieve your goal. Maybe a long running project. Maybe many times you ask for something, but the priorities change. From the company's perspective, they wanted to do these things maybe in this quarter, but it got delayed to like next quarter or next year. And then you had to make quite frequent changes and adapt your team, your situation, your product according to that. So the purpose of this question is very simple. Do you have the patience, perseverance to complete what you need? And for sure, you can, I believe you would be able to justify this answer, because it's not an uncommon scenario to have like changing goals and changing deadlines, because the priorities can change at any moment at any company. So now we have completed 30 questions, 3 main categories. Let's go to question number 31. And from now on, you would be seeing a lot of like similar or repetitive questions. So I would quickly go over them. If I see some important, I will go deeper into them. So first one is, describe a situation where you had to use communication skills to resolve a conflict. I think we already spoke about this, but once again, the interviewer wants to check that are you articulate and diplomatic enough to convey your thoughts, resolve issues, maybe issues between two team members, issues between two teams, issues between two VPs. So how can you take care of that? So you can come up with some examples for sure. Let me know in the comments if you can't think of examples, and maybe I can give some suggestions. But I think, yeah, there will always be some conflict somewhere in some company. Okay, tell me about a time when you had to give critical feedback to someone. How did you approach it? Again, maybe you realize someone was not doing their work. You reached out to them. You asked for the reason. If it was a scenario where they were genuinely affected by something, you try to help out. But if not, you realize that they were just being lazy or slacking, or they were just not respecting the company or project. How did you give them the feedback? You can say that you gave them feedback in private. You try to show them the potential path forward. You try to understand that their situation. You had empathy towards them. You communicated all the possible options. If they still didn't realize, maybe you had to give that feedback to your manager as well, or escalate the issue, but that can be like the last sort of resource. So feedback should never be public, in my opinion, during the first conversation, because that leaves a very bad remark and resentfulness amongst employees. So always do these things in private. Try to have empathy towards them, and don't approach as if you are trying to give them advice. Try to approach as if you are trying to solve this problem and help them get better, and genuinely do that, because that's the correct approach about this. Next is describe a project where you took a creative approach to solve a problem. So I think we already spoke enough about different creative approaches. So you can think about how you get creative with the resources, how you get creative with the process, how you get creative with the available tech stack. Maybe you try to improve the technology that your team was using and you get creative with that. Maybe you became creative with the procedure or protocol that needed to be followed and you automated that. There can be a lot of options. Okay, next question. Can you provide an example of a time when you had to juggle several projects at the same time? So once again, the purpose of asking this question is very clear, that are you a person who can clearly define priorities? If you have to work on multiple projects, what is your approach? How do you justify working on each project? And how do you allocate your time? So this question in itself contains a lot of moving components and there can be a lot of follow-up questions. This is a very popular and real sort of question that you can expect in any interview. So try to make some good answer for that. Okay, next is, how do you prioritize your work when you have multiple projects to handle? I think it's very similar to the previous question. The only difference is that now you are talking explicitly about the priorities, and you can mention that there can be moving priorities. If some product is being released immediately, there can be priorities from the business point of view. There can be priorities from the technical debt point of view. There can be priorities from revenue point of view. So that way, depending on what's good for the company, you can define or adjust the priorities. Plus, priorities can be determined by the deadline. If something is low priority but has very close deadline coming in, immediately you will have to get that thing done, even if, because you might not be able to mess up the deadline. So that suddenly becomes high priority in that scenario. Maybe you have some work that is really high priority and highly critical, but you still have like 3 weeks of deadline in between. But something urgent needs right now. Maybe there is some production issue. So then that becomes the highest priority. So that's how you juggle the priorities. It's an art of constantly changing things depending on the situation and how fluid the issues change. Okay, now let's go to the question number 36. That is, describe a time when you had to use your negotiation skills. This is where the diplomacy comes into the place. Maybe you had to work with other teams. Maybe you needed resources from their team. Maybe there were some specific testing time slots that you needed and you had to convince other team that can I go first? How did you negotiate with them? How did you improvise? Maybe you had to negotiate with the clients. Maybe you had to negotiate with the consumers. You had to negotiate with the stakeholders. So this is a very real question. And the follow-up questions in this case would be that how did you build that scenario? What if something goes wrong? How do you manage risk while negotiating? How do you know what is the upper and lower limit, up to what point you can negotiate? So these can be quite interesting questions. Okay, next is, tell me about a time when you had to manage conflicting priorities. I think we can skip this question because it's very similar to the previous questions, just the wording is different. Okay, next one is, how do you handle constructive criticism? Really good question. Once again, purpose of this is to make sure that are you the person who can take the feedback and make improvements in yourself. So the interviewer wants to know the example or specific examples about the changes that you have made in yourself based on some of the feedback you receive, and how do you go about that? What's your attitude towards that? So try to put more focus or more information about that thing. Okay. Next is, can you describe a time when you had to communicate complex information clearly? Now, purpose of this question is that complex information can be complex for one group of people, but it can be really simple for other group of people. So which means you can approach this question as in that information complexity depends on the group of people you are trying to convey. So if there is a technical problem and you are trying to discuss with amongst the technical teams, amongst tech leads or developers or architects, you can communicate in normal terms because everyone understands the concepts and implications. if you're trying to working something and you are trying to explain the same thing to the business or business executives, then you have to be creative because it's a complex topic for them. How do you break it down? How do you explain pros and cons? So you can try to incorporate this in your answer. Okay. Now question number 40. Describe a situation where you had to actively listen to someone to understand their perspective. How did you go about that? What does active listening means? How do you get involved? How do you convince them that they should start speaking about their concerns? All of these things are part of this question. So I don't think that explicitly you are ever going to be asked this question, but more or less you would be judged based on your active listening skills whenever you are speaking with the interviewer in the interview. So yeah, you got the idea. You are a smart person. Okay. Now let's move on to the question number 41, and now we are going into the realm of leadership. Now leadership typically applies for people who are applying for the senior level roles, maybe like project lead, team lead, director, something. Okay. So it would be mostly like, okay, give me an example of a goal you set and how did you achieve it. You can say we set up some priorities, some project, new initiative, convince the team. You created a deadline. You had this roadmap to complete the project. How did you achieve that? How did you stay up to date? How did you make sure that you are on track and you are not deviating? So these are the things you can talk about. Next is, have you ever had to make an unpopular decision? How did you handle the feedback? Pretty impressive, interesting question, because many times unpopular decisions can have lot of dimensions to it. There can be an unpopular decision to let someone go. There can be an unpopular decision to scrap a project. There can be an unpopular decision to change an existing infrastructure. There can be an unpopular decision to change the way things happen or things behave. The organization is set up. Change the different teams. So number one, why did you do it? How did you approach it? How did you explain or convey it to your team? When your team maybe had their concerns, how did you take that into the effect, and how did you convince them that why you needed to do that? How transparent were you? What was your thought process like? All of these things you need to think about. Okay, next question is, have you ever worked on a project that failed? What did you learn from that experience? Now, if you say that you have never worked on a project that failed, I think you are lying. Because honestly, at some point, for some reason, projects fail. But that gives great understanding on what all the things went wrong and how did you approach it. So what you want to do for this question is to make sure that you emphasize on the focus about the scenario, why project failed, what did you learn from it, and if you had to do it again, how would you do things differently? This would be the important key piece of information. Okay, let me drink some water. Okay, cool. Let's move on to the next question. Can you give an example of how you handle high stress situation? I think you can say that you try to remain calm and you try to see the good side and bad side and maintain your composure. And if you had to deal with such situation, you can give some example, because it's going to be different for every single individual. And the purpose of asking this question is that, are you the person who can still make sound minded decisions when you are dealing adversity? Because many times whenever things starts going bad, the executives or the team leaders or project managers, they have to make some tough decisions in like really quick manner. So they wants to see that, can you handle such situations? Okay, next one is, tell me about a time when you had to take responsibility for an error made by someone else. I think we can think about this, about an example that I gave earlier regarding ISRO and Dr. APJ Abdul Kalam. But on top of it, you can also say that you were responsible for some project to be delivered, and you delivered and you deployed in production. And then you realize that that project had some maybe bug that was never found, and then even though it was QA's responsibility, still you are more responsible because you are accountable for this project. And remember, whenever we are talking about leadership, we are talking about responsibility and accountability, which means, are you the finger pointing or blame guy that says that because of this it failed, or because of that it failed, or says that I think I made some mistake, maybe I could have done things differently, and let me try to rectify my mistakes. So they wanted to see that uh, priorities in your attitude. So always try to have the latter attitude, where you are taking the responsibility and accountability for the things that happen. Okay, next thing is, how do you assess the success of a project given an example? Well, one standard ratio is on budget and on time. If the project is on budget and on time, it tends to be successful. Maybe there can be an impact as well, but it varies from project to project. If you are trying to launch a new project, then success would be defined by how well public received it. If you are trying to get rid of some technical debt, the success would be received by how easy it made the lives of developers, or how we improved technology became. So yeah, it depends on what type of example you are going to give. Next is, tell me about a time when you had to decide without all the information you needed. Now this is a tricky question. The question is, why all the information was not available at your hand? That is the first question. So did you try to find all the information? If you did and still some information was missing, what were the steps you took before you made the decision? These are the things you will have to consider before you answer this question. So think about the experience. Maybe you can think about a scenario where you are dealing with an old piece of system that has a lot of APIs, and you don't know that what are the uses for all of these APIs, and maybe it was developed like 20 years ago, and you don't know, you might want to decommission those unused APIs. So what will be your approach? We'll see. Currently I'm trying to use my cell phone, so that's why. Okay, once again, what's happening, man? I'm so sorry about this, folks. Okay, it's so zoomed in. Okay, cool. This should do it. It's time to move it. It's time to move it. It's time to move it. Okay. Okay, I think this is still good enough. Okay, cool. Let me go back again. So sorry about that, my friends. My apologies. Okay, going back to the question. I think now this has been fixed. What question we were at? Okay, let me see. Okay, yeah. So tell me about a time when you had to decide without all the information you needed. Basically, you made a judgment call, but what were your considerations before you made that judgment call, and how did you try to assess the situation, and what was your backup solution for this problem? You will also have to remember that. Okay. Okay, now next one is, describe a situation where you had to analyze data and make a recommendation. What approach did you take? So this is there to judge your analytical skills. How can you make decisions based on the available data at hand? Can you decide which applications you need to remake or re-architect? What type of services you are going to make? If you have to invest some more money to critically enhance the capabilities of existing project, how can you do that? These can be the examples you can give. And yeah, so this has to take into consideration about different aspects of any particular project or product, and then making the judgment call or making the decisions that would impact a lot of people, a lot of teams, or a lot of products. Okay. And next is, have you ever faced an ethical dilemma at work? Now, how did you handle it? To be honest, I personally have never felt an ethical dilemma, so I couldn't give you an example for this. I think it's more suited towards like more higher senior level people. Maybe if they find out that one of their employee did something wrong, and if they report it, that employee is for sure going to get fired, but they know that the employee didn't do it because he wanted to scam the company. Maybe he just made a genuine mistake. So that's a genuine ethical dilemma. On one hand, as a manager, it's his duty to report that employee to the HR. That's the work that he or she needs to do as a manager. On the other side, that manager knows that employee was genuine. Maybe he got misguided and he just made a bad judgment call. Should he or she report to the HR? If they report to the HR, they know that for sure the employee is going to get fired. If they don't report to the HR, they would know that they didn't do their duties that well. What could be the approach? That's the ethical dilemma. So how would you handle it? Think about it. It's an interesting question. And last one is, describe a situation where you took a risk and it paid off. Now this is a tricky question, because not only you took a risk, why you had to take the risk, and what parameters you decided before you dive deeper into the realm of that risk category that you will have to justify to your team. Okay, so always make sure that before you answer this question, think about these scenarios, because that is the whole intention of asking this question. And I think with this, we have completed all 50 questions, and this should cover most of the question related to behavioral interviews. Think what would your answers be for each one of these questions. You can like pause the video and take the screenshots of all of these questions, because it will be really helpful. Okay, now let's see some of the last few notes that we will quickly go over. That is, how can we deal with difficult situation? So first we will have to understand that why the question is difficult. Maybe an example of a difficult question is, give me an example of an ethical dilemma that you had to face. That's a difficult question for sure. How do you answer it? On one hand, if you stay on one side of the coin or other side of the coin, in both the cases there would be follow-ups that are going to be bad for you. So you need to walk on a fine line and create or perform that balancing act while portraying your answers and giving the answers. Okay, so make sure like that, how do you deal with weaknesses or failures? What would be your approach? How would you take care of it? And always, for any question that you would be asked, for sure there would be 2 or 3 follow-up questions that are going to ask you to go deeper and deeper into the answer you gave. So always be prepared for that. And that's why I'm saying always give honest answer, so that you can give all the answers honestly. And next one is, these are just some of the strategies you can take care of. That you try to stay calm, try to think on your feet, try to check that what the surroundings is, what is the situation going on, how they are behaving, what are their expressions, and always give the answer in the STAR format. So situation, task, action, result. STAR is your friend, and be the star of your interview. Okay, now let's just talk about how you can incorporate emotional intelligence during your interviews. So emotional intelligence is actually quite important. Throughout the examples that I gave while I was discussing like those 50 questions, there were a lot of scenarios where you can see the examples of emotional intelligence. Reaching out to your employee or reaching out to your coworker to ask what's wrong, that's a sign of emotional intelligence. Trying to empathize with someone, that's a sign of emotional intelligence. Trying to judge how the response is going to be depending on different situation, that's a sign of emotional intelligence. So these are all the things that has to be incorporated. And without the good understanding of emotional intelligence, you cannot be an effective leader or effective contributor in the team. So that's why you have to be mindful on what is happening, and depending on the situation, you need to make the judgment call that is best for yourself, for the company, for the project, and for your coworker. Okay, so always demonstrate empathy and self-awareness. Be self-aware what you are saying might impact negatively to someone else. If you have to criticize someone, do it in private. If you have to praise someone, do it in public. Give recognition, try to take the accountability, and also have empathy towards your fellow team members, your clients, your customers. That is going to lead you to the long way. And it's just the act of how can you balance your professional life from your personal thinking, and make sure that you are making that separation. Even if you are, let's say that, let's assume that your classmate from your high school is suddenly working as under one of your other team, and you are maybe in a higher position than them, and maybe they were bullies towards you. How would you handle that situation? You will need to have the emotional intelligence to keep the past on the side and just focus on where you are and act in a professional manner. Same way, maybe if someone is very close to you, very nice friend of you, but still if they made some mistake and they are in your team or something, you need to be professional. Despite having your great friendship or admiration, you will need to walk on the tight rope with appropriate balance and separation to keep your professional things on the side. Okay, so always use emotional intelligence and have that situational action going on. Now let's talk about non-verbal communication. Now non-verbal communication comes into the picture in two different manners. Depends on whether you are applying for an interview that is in person or an interview that is remote. In both the scenarios, the non-verbal communication would be different. Always make sure that you are dressed nicely and your looks are like simple and decent. Like, I'm not saying that you should do something special about it. Just be the way you are, and wear like normal decent clothes that looks decent for that particular situation. Just don't go in the interviews in the tank tops. It doesn't really look good unless you are Vin Diesel from Fast and Furious. Okay, so for the non-verbal communication, always have a body language that is sound, profound. Sit in like correct posture. Maybe if you are like walking or standing, just like behave in a certain manner that looks appropriate. Always try to maintain eye contact if you are an in-person interview, because if you are speaking with someone and you are making that eye contact, which means you are giving the importance and you are conveying your thoughts in a proper manner. If you are listening to someone and you are making the eye contact, which means you are paying your attention towards what they are saying. So eye contact is important and a very important part of the communication for both verbal and like active communication and passive communication. Okay, and the next thing is that your facial expression, smile here and there, maybe have glances, try to read the room. Don't laugh out loud like crazy, or don't have some like vulgar expressions on the face, because it doesn't really look good and definitely doesn't work well in any office culture except the office show. And use the space wisely. If there is like a big enough room, try to roam around. If there is a huge conference table and it's just two person sitting, like don't sit too close with the interviewer and don't sit on the opposite ends of the interviewer. Just make that balancing act. Okay, you have that judgment call. For the virtual interview, make sure that your camera works fine, your camera is on, the background of your camera or the background scene behind your room is not too cluttered, or if it is, try to blur it out using the filters. Try to look in the camera when you speak. Try to understand. Always try to, if you have any questions that you have to ask, instead of interrupting the other person, maybe try to use that hand gesture. In all the virtual meetings like Zoom or Microsoft Teams, they have that feature. Okay, and preparation strategies, it's quite simple. Do like write all of the stories and experiences in the STAR method. On top of it, practice the answers. Try to give the answer to different people, or try to understand in your own that if you are asked this question, how would you answer it. Always, if possible, do mock interviews, because mock interviews is going to be the best way for you to get ready for any sort of interview. So whether it's behavioral, technical, or system design interview, give mock interviews, and that would be really helpful. And just be in the moment. Things can change, questions can change. Try to crack some like funny anecdotes or jokes here and there, and that would be helpful. Don't try, but the joke should be in the good taste, not in the bad taste. Okay, so you just be in the moment. And some of the popular resources. So there are a couple of awesome books like Cracking the Coding Interview and 101 Great Answers to the Toughest Interview Questions. You can do that. There are some popular online courses on LinkedIn Learning, Coursera or Udemy that are not very expensive, and you can go and pick that up. Couple of websites that I would like to recommend you is levels.fyi. They have a beautiful article on the behavioral interviews, so you can go and check it out. Next one is Glassdoor, because they have company reviews for every single different companies from their employees, so you can also use that. There are some important subreddits that you can use. That is a subreddit for jobs, interviews and CS career questions. I found them really helpful, so maybe you can also use them. And that sums up my presentation on how you can master the behavioral interviews. Let me know if I did something good, if I did something bad, if I messed up. How did you feel about that? Okay, let's change the presentation. Okay, what do you feel about it? Do you think, is there anything else I could have done to make this interview better or make this session better? I know I covered a lot of ground, so if I bored you to the death, I'm really sorry. My aim was to try to help everyone as much as possible, and I try to make as good content as I can. So I'm always improving on my skills and try to make better videos. So if you ever feel like that there is something I could have done better, feel free to let me know in the comments. I'm always listening, and take care.